Well, hello and welcome. I wish we could have been in the same room. I've just come from a session, which has been fascinating, where everybody has, or most have been in the room itself, and you can ask face-to-face questions. So in a way, I feel I'm throwing questions, this conversation is taking place in the air somewhere. So first of all, could I just get an acknowledgement of who's around? What's the best way to do this? Or shall I speak and will you ask questions? What do you think would be best? Well, this is just an online networking session. So to get the conversation going, I would like to tell you a little bit about myself, because from what I understand, the intention is for young journalists to get an idea of how to get into the profession. Now, what happened is when I started a very long time ago in journalism, I had this idea that I wanted to be a journalist, but it had just been floating around in the background. And then I saw an ad in the Guardian newspaper saying that there were tests for people who wanted to be sub-editors in journalism in the Bush House newsroom. So I applied, and I was told that I'd been shortlisted, but the first 3 would get the job, and so I would be on a waiting list. Then suddenly, on the Friday, I was telephoned to say, oh, someone's dropped out, so you've got the job, you're starting a contract from Monday for 3 months with BBC World Service News. And this came as much of a surprise to me as to anybody. And then my question was, should I give up what I'm doing just to leap in at 2 days' notice? But I did. And with that, I ended up with the BBC for nearly 30 years. And I started as a sub-editor in the newsroom, in the BBC World Service English newsroom, because there were also language sections. And at that time, there were about 106 journalists, and they were all from, shall I say, the West. So there were only 3 non-European journalists and very few women, and I was one of the 3. And from then on, I worked my way through the BBC World Service newsroom from sub-editor, chief sub-editor, duty editor, to TV. And then I became Asia editor at BBC World Television News, where I was editing 3 programs a day across Asia. And what was exciting about that period and that time, and for me, the journalism, was suddenly, and especially with the BBC label, doors unlocked. And you found you could speak to anybody, because if you said it was for the program and whoever it was, so over the years, I got to know leading politicians to the extent that they would start calling me or their offices if they found that they were visiting and they wanted to speak to the world, as it were, they would contact me. And from then I, got to know, as I said, people like Benazir Bhutto and Chandrika Kumaratunga, the former Professor of Bangladesh, of Sri Lanka, and so on. So I was able to be on top of these news events. And that which has kept me motivated and excited with what's happening. And I'm hoping that today, with my colleagues on the panel, you'll be able to ask them questions and use this as a chance to interact with them, to get any hints, any advice, get all your queries answered. So can I first introduce you to my colleague, Chris Cobb, who is the president of the Commonwealth Journalists Association. And now that we're talking about the Commonwealth, and as one of my colleagues said earlier, the only time the Commonwealth seems to hit the international headlines is when there's a Commonwealth Heads of Government meeting or when the Commonwealth Games take place, wherever they might be. So Chris, could you tell us a little bit more about your background and the Commonwealth Games and how they're being covered in Canada. And then Shalaz, maybe you could tell us about India. And I don't know if we're going to hear from Kayode Soyinka, who's in Nigeria. I don't know if he's around. If he isn't, first, Chris, could you kick off, please? Thank you.
Okay, hi. Can you hear me okay?
Yes, absolutely.
Okay, great. Yes, I'm Chris Cobb. I've been with the Commonwealth Journalists Association in various capacities since, well, for more than 20 years, actually. During that time, I've developed many professional and personal relationships with members across the Commonwealth, and just to back up a little bit, I became president of the CJA about a year ago, and one of the first things I did was launch a revision of the Constitution, which was written way before my time in the 1970s when the CJA was born. The Constitution had no mention of the word computer, let alone internet. Yet, even without those, what we now assume are essential tools of communication, the CJA grew, and it grew because of the relationships it was able to form across the world. You know, people actually develop lifelong friendships. So today, in theory, it should be even easier to achieve that, to achieve those connections and relationships, because, in my view, they're hugely important. You know, they give you the strength in numbers, and they give you comfort in knowing that you're not alone in adversity. So when we get into the discussion, I'd like to sort of address that in some more detail, but you know, I'll leave it by saying networking is hugely important, and particularly for journalists in every country, including the one I'm in now, the great country of Canada.
Well, Shalaz, I just heard you in the previous session, and you've obviously been engaged and you've covered politics and how sports is no longer considered a politics-free zone. And things have changed, the coverage have changed. So could you just recap again the Commonwealth Games, India, human rights, and your perspective on the Games and these issues that were discussed earlier?
Yeah, thanks. Commonwealth Games, you know, I would say rather than from the start, it has been, you know, an event where India have done really well. I mean, if you compare it to Asian Games or the Olympics, Commonwealth Games has been the go-to games for Indian sports person, where they could, you know, prove their worth. So on that respect, Commonwealth Games has been a very, very important event for us. And the 2010 Delhi Games, that was massive in respect to, you know, showing India as a sporting country, because it was the first time that India was in fact, the last time India hosted a big ticket event was the 1982 Asian Games, and it was 2010, 8 years later that India was hosting such a big event. And fortunately, India did well. We won more than 100 medals in that event. And what that event did was, you know, usher in a sports culture, usher in, if you see Delhi, it grew as a city in terms of infrastructure, in terms of transportation and everything. There was such a lot. I mean, it became a global city, Delhi, in a sense, because of the development and everything. So that way, Commonwealth Games have had a huge impact on India as a country. But for me personally, since we are talking about networking, the topic of networking, it was mine also the first big event at the start of my journalist career, where I get to interact with the people from all over, not only sports people but journalists as well. And I still have those connections. I still you know I could get easy access to people, so that way I could network on a big scale. So that showed me how networking is important in our profession, because those times you did not have Twitter, you did not have any social media, you did not even have proper websites or anything like the ones where you see today websites mushroom like anything everywhere, and you get easy access to information. But during those times all you had to rely was on networking to get those information, to share information. For that exchange of information to happen, you had to have networking, and a strong networking. So that way networking became very important to me. uh, but yes, networking has changed. Today there is easy access. In fact, anyone, like to a person who doesn't have any interest in probably pursuing journalism, all he needs is a phone and a blog, and he could write, he could share information, he could write about news, he could report news. So things have changed drastically. But I feel networking, we should be an inclusive society in that way. We should include them as well in our part, in our society, in our journalist society. So I feel networking is quite important.
Before we take questions from participants, just wanted to ask you, so far we've heard the pluses of social media and networking. Do you think, or do you have any advice for young journalists to deal with trolling and all the negative sides? Because now ideas and opinions are so polarized that the BBC culture where I grew up, or professionally, was that, you had very clear dividing lines between what was news, what was opinion, what was comment. But now anything becomes viral. Someone makes, and once you've put something out on Twitter, you may regret it. There could be a mistake, but it's there forever. So Shalaz, could you say first, and then Chris, about your concerns about how things can go wrong?
Yeah. The basic of our profession is, truth and accuracy. That is the basic tenets of journalism. You have to report facts. So, I mean, in today's world, probably we just can't guarantee truth, but what we can do is present, facts. That is the basic thing which I feel. It might be, what is true to you might be relatively, not a true statement for others. So that is, but we can't deviate from facts. And verify each and every fact before we establish them. So that way, I feel the trolling would be lesser, because if you present facts, you're not going to be trolled. It's not going to be easy to get, to face a troll, because the person who will be trolling you would know that, you are reporting facts. And once you do that, you are in the clear. So that is one thing. And another part, which I feel is, I mean, as journalists, even I often ask these questions: are we independent enough? As you said, we post something on Twitter or on social media and that stays on forever. But do we have those independent voices to post those? Or are we controlled by, where we work? Are we controlled by those organizations? And we have to follow those kind of, I won't say that, I won't say the orders of this organization, but the principles of this organization. Because some might be pro-government, some might be anti-government. There clearly the divide in today's world. So as journalists, are we independent enough to voice our concern? So that for that you need to have some sort of courage, I feel, to take a stand. So that is very important, I feel.
Chris, any thoughts?
Well, we're all sort of victims or potential victims of algorithms, right? So when we do Google searches, whatever we do is tracked, and that leads to us being fed what the algorithms think we want to read. So we get fed with information, a lot of it totally worthless, that feeds our prejudice, and that is hugely dangerous, in my opinion. So my advice is to choose your sources on the internet carefully, because a lot, who knows what percentage, but a huge percentage of the opinion and information that circulates on the internet, social media, etc., is worthless, and often inaccurate. And so find your sources. I mean, mainstream media has taken a beating in the past few years. You could point to Donald Trump coining this phrase "fake news," which a lot of people have swallowed and believe, because Trump disliked what was being said on certain TV news channels and in certain newspapers, so he dismissed it as fake news. But it isn't fake news. It's where you get your reliable sources, where there's investment in journalism, where journalists are trained, not just somebody who sits in front of a computer pretending to be a journalist. So yeah, choose your sources, choose them well.
Well, that's very helpful to start us off. Now, can I invite all the student journalists online to direct your questions, please, to the speakers?
I can see Debbie Ransom there.
Yeah. So, Debbie, while we wait for others, Debbie, you're an experienced seasoned journalist, and you've been active on so many fronts. It's difficult to keep track of you. So what sort of, in fact, you're more in the line of answering questions and asking questions. So do you want to come up with some thoughts of your own on some of the issues that for young journalists, especially, that need to be aware of?
I've been following this morning's session while, sorry I couldn't make it to Birmingham, but just the amazing world that young journalists are coming into. The session just now with Google Lab, absolutely amazing in terms of the tools that are available, but you can see that these tools are a double-edged sword. And I'm thinking about, I mean, just a very quick history for me. I started as a journalist. I was born here of Caribbean parents, disappeared off to the Caribbean, started work down there, spent 10 years actually cutting my eye teeth in journalism in the Caribbean, working for Reuters Caribbean, Kana, Radio Trinidad, and then coming back to Britain to work with BBC's Caribbean service, ending up heading it, then working for the Commonwealth as a communications consultant. But in all that time, we faced various challenges, but they were direct and in front of you. If somebody points an AK-47 at you on the streets of Port of Spain during an attempted coup, it is very real. Today, I can see that young journalists, they're facing tools, they're facing ammo that they didn't know. You know, a tweet that you made in your undergraduate days when you were 18 years old can come back and get you when you're reaching the height of your profession. And I just think that it's almost like a 360-degree check on yourself as you work as a journalist today, because it's not only, as I edit the CJA newsletter, and a lot of the reports we get are journalists now being held on something they tweeted on 5 years ago. So it seems to me that the ammo's coming in all directions. And so for young journalists, they've got to be so wary of their brand as well as of the job they're actually doing on the ground. That's what I take from this morning's sessions.
Well, I can see your hand is up, Khadija. Can you speak, please?
All right, thank you very much, ma'am. Yeah. Okay, so can you hear me, please?
Yes, we can see you hear you very clearly.
All right, thank you. I really appreciate all of the guest speakers. I am speaking from Nigeria. That's a Union of Campus Journalists from University of Ibadan. I really appreciate the insights of the guest speakers, and it's been beautiful. I was not able to participate in the first main session due to some issues from here, but I look forward to participating in the second part of the session. But from what I can pick from what the speakers have said right now, it is about how we, student journalists, are actually getting advantage of social media platforms, and how we can still retrace our steps of maximizing how we use it and ensure that we don't spread. For my country now, there's a common thing like fake news here and there, and people don't even bother to fact check before they just post news or say stuffs. So I get to understand that, okay, before I post any news, before I say anything, before I put anything, I have to be more conscious and fact check from various sources before I can do that. All thanks to social media too, that I can do all of that online, even without having to go to offices and all of that. So I appreciate every guest speaker, and I appreciate the Commonwealth Journalists Association for this opportunity and for bringing a conference like this. And I hope to have more of this to give us student journalists more insights. Thank you.
Since we do have so many experienced journalists on the panel, have you encountered a specific problem? Are you concerned about certain stories that you've seen? Is there anything that you would like to ask the panelists about?
All right, thank you. Yes, the only thing I would say I can see, and that's like a major thing here in my country, is the fact that people don't fact check news before they share. Even some journalists, some student journalists just post from sources, and like the journalism in them is like it's not showing. Like, how can somebody cop that kind of thing where even a journalist does not even want to bother to fact check? When you just see news, you just start spreading and just forwarding and all of that. And I really don't get that part where even when journalists can't fact check themselves, why else would a common citizen or somebody that is not even a journalist would not fact check? How can the curb of spreading fake news? Although my country is putting a lot of measures in place, but like for we personally, how can we do that? Probably news on campuses, news in our university, how to fact check. Like, is there a way we can always track them down or something to get the news fact checked before being posted or being shared across to people?
I think that's probably what a lot of people want to know. You're told fact check everything, but how do you know where to go to fact check? So shall I?
Can I ask the Kadiat? Sorry if I'm mispronouncing your name.
Khadija? Yeah. Okay.
Yeah. Can you tell us a bit about yourself? You're still in school, are you?
Yes, I am in school. I'm in my final year, 500 level.
So you go out into the workforce when?
What did you say? I didn't get that part, please.
When do you leave school? When do you leave your university?
I would be graduating this year.
Okay.
Oh, okay.
Right.
So if perhaps Rita can relay the question if you can't hear it, but how would you assess the current media environment in Nigeria?
All right. Okay. How I can assess it, if I should put on a scale of 10, I think that would be around 6, because there are a lot of major stations, major media outlets in Nigeria, and they are doing their very best, I know. But even there was an attack that happened like 2 weeks back or 3 weeks back, and even a major TV channel reported what was meant to be a shooting spree as an explosion. And that was what was all over the news. And for a trusted media outlet to have done that, like, I really don't get that part. So we have this more of these things like that. Like if people die or if anything happens, it's always like people even the general public believes that it means that okay, probably those are not the exact number of people that died, or those are not the exact people that are affected. Because even the general public feels like okay, this thing is not reliable. There must be an addition of people or either reduction of people. People are not even sure of what they see, even for major outlets.
Do you see a career for yourself in journalism in Nigeria?
I really don't have much, should I say, I can't really say interest, but I really don't have much, I don't know, like zeal for journalism. I just do it like, for example, now in my department, you have a press team and I have to report news and happenings in school. So that's why I am in the press team. But I can't really say if after graduation, I would be doing that because I would like to practice my field of study and it's not related to journalism.
If I could just answer your question directly, you said you missed this morning's session, but the Google Labs lady is going to circulate a PDF which shows you the free tools that you can get from Google to do some fact checking. And I would suggest that CJA, what we will do is make sure it's in the next newsletter and it goes up on the website. Right, Rita?
Yes,
so
absolutely.
that you can share that and share that with all of your journalists and people who want to be journalists, because it's an amazing free kit of parts, a set of tools that you and your colleagues can use for fact checking.
All right, thank you very much.
Are you happy with that? Thank you very much. I can see now Victoria Chang's hand up. So Victoria, could you say where you are and then, put your questions to the panel, to one specific speaker?
Hi, yes, thanks so much. My name is Victoria. I'm currently studying at the University of Glasgow, which is how I know about this, and I'm currently calling in from Glasgow, but I'm from Canada, from Toronto. But just wanted to thank the speakers and the panelists for giving us this opportunity. But I just wanted to ask your opinion, because I know a couple of you have mentioned finding your individual voice in social media as a journalist, but I wanted to know your opinion on like having a personal social media presence versus a professional social media presence, because I study medicine and they encourage a lot of us and our doctors to have more of a separate kind of division there. And I know as a person, you're obviously entitled to your own opinions and stuff, but you don't want that to affect your readers or your audience to who you're reporting to. So I just wondered what your guys' opinion on was having more of a clear division on your personal social media versus a professional social media presence.
Well, that's an interesting one, Shalaz.
Hi, Victoria. It's a very interesting question, actually. A lot of times, at least if I can be frank enough, I at one point during the start of my Twitter social media account, I myself had two social media accounts, one for the professional one and one for the personal one. But I personally realized, what's on the social media is same, right? Even if you use a personal handle, and if you use a professional handle, right? What you're going to post out there is same. I mean, in terms of visibility, it will be same. If they, with the kind of tracking and everything that we have today, everything can come down to you, because it's you who will be posting it at the end of the day. It's not that, but yes, if you strictly want to, put something, if I hear you are a doctor, you're studying medicine, right? Yeah. So if you want to put something out in your field of research, of course, that is your discretion. If you can put it up there and you can just want that as a business account, perhaps, yeah, that would be a good classification. If you want to put it up as a business account, that works. But if you're having just, for the sake of having two accounts, professional and personal, I don't think it works that much. If you want to, what would I say? Like, I myself felt that, your followers get divided. When you have two accounts, people don't know which is the right account to follow. So your followers get divided at one point. I mean, initially you wouldn't be feeling that, because I'm talking out from my personal experience. You wouldn't feel that your followers are not you. You would probably feel that your followers are following you both on both accounts. But then at a certain point in time, you would find that what you're tweeting from your professional account is not getting the right kind of coverage. So it's better to have one account where you probably pitch all your ideas through that, so that your followers can get a personal, could know you personally through your tweets and everything. So that is my view. Yeah.
Victoria, can you give us an idea of how you use social media to get your own news? Where do you go? Do you have any doubts as to how to get your media? Are you worried about the media sources that you get?
To be honest, I use a lot of social media. I probably would say, I use Instagram the most, and I don't really get news information from there, but I do try to stay with like BBC's app and the New York Times. So I think those are very helpful for me personally, because they report on, where I am. But yeah, I am like, you see a lot of stuff circulating, especially with like, I have a lot of friends who are very politically outspoken. And so mostly I go through them and their reposts on Instagram or Twitter and things like that. So, sometimes I am worried about like, oh, where is this coming from? Stuff like that. But if you kind of do a Google search yourself, you can do your own reading and choose your own sources. But I think it really is up to the user and up to, there's all these algorithms now that personalize to your, preferences or whatever. So you really see what you want to see sometimes. But yeah, I hope that sort of answers it. But
right. So do you tend to always follow people with whom you share the same views? Or do you sometimes like to know what the others might be saying?
No, I am.
We also talk about echo chambers at the moment.
Yeah.
People are only talking to other people with the same views, so they're not exposed. And we've almost got to learn to disagree.
No, absolutely. I think I am curious about the other side for sure. It's just I personally don't know many, like, so for example, like the recent abortion rulings and things like that. It's a very, big atmosphere, and you need to be very, liberal, and you're for these rights. And, I would love to hear all the opinions of, the people who are sort of, the other way leaning. But I just personally, from my experience, I just see these people who mostly I share opinions with. And I do feel like sometimes you can get trapped in that, your own little worlds. But I am very curious, and like, I don't really know where to go for it. Like, there are reportings and articles that I read, and that gives more of an impartial view on it. But I also am curious to see the other opinions and the other side. But I honestly don't get much exposure just because of who I'm friends with or who I follow on social media.
Well, that's useful, and hopefully we can, come back to you. I'm just wondering if Kareem Shamsuddin might like to say something. I can see your name up. Kareem, are you there?
Let me just chime in, Rita, with something, if I may.
Yes, of course.
Journalists should not have personal Twitter accounts or any other account where they're expressing personal opinion. I can't speak for the medical profession or any other profession, but if you're a journalist and expressing personal opinion, and you're also covering, for example, you're covering politics, and you're supposed to be writing fair and balanced stories, and suppose you get involved in an investigation of some sort. If the people you're investigating and are at the negative end of what you're doing can refer back to your personal Twitter account where they can see your prejudices all there for all to see. They can use that as a weapon against you. and and basically destroy the credibility of the journalism you're trying to do.
Now, one thing that the CJA we campaign for, of course, is media freedom, threats to media freedom. And the recent report by the Index on Censorship paints a very disturbing picture of the state of the media, proving that journalism remains a dangerous profession. In 2021 alone, 293 journalists were imprisoned across the world, 28 were killed, and of those 28 cases, 22 remain unsolved. So the globalization, the violence, I don't know if any of the student journalists have themselves experienced any threats, intimidation. Chris, what about you? In a way,
Well,
Canada's quite lucky. A lot of other Commonwealth countries have a worse record of freedom.
Well, yeah, we're very lucky here. That's true. But if we're talking about journalism under attack, there is a case to be made that it's happening here too, because mostly American, US hedge funds are buying up newspapers all across the continent, buying media houses, stripping them to the bone, slashing resources, and making it extremely difficult to do good journalism. So while we're not physically threatened by the authorities as journalists are in some countries, there's a struggle here, and it's a very real one. But let me bring it back to this networking aspect, because, as I said at the outset, having a network of like-minded journalists across the Commonwealth, across the world, there's a form of protection in it. Particularly the Commonwealth, where all the countries have signed on to certain codes that allegedly protect freedom of speech, and a lot of them have signed on without any intention or ability to fulfill them. It's important, I think, to have an organization like the CJA to exert some pressure, and members in these countries, and to offer some element of protection to members in these countries, because the authorities are well aware of journalists who are members of the CJA, and they're also well aware that there's they have to be a bit careful, or else it can backfire on them. Abuse of journalists can backfire on them. But as you say, Rita, it really is a dreadful situation in many countries.
Shalaz, would you say that you're in a particularly comparatively safer position because you're specializing in sport? Do you think life would have been much more difficult for you to operate if you covered politics and international affairs?
Certainly, yeah, certainly so, Rita. If I may say so, like, for us, sports journalists, obviously, we don't need to cover so much of politics and various other issues. But in India, we have been seeing for the last 5 or 6 years, there has been instances, in fact, several of them, where the freedom of speech or freedom of writing for journalists has been a what would I say? There has been a series of incidents where the freedom has been curtailed. So you have to tread on a you're treading on a very treacherous path. You don't know where you will be pulled up for what tweet or for what article you write. As Chris said, in US, he said in his part, there has been this kind of the hedge funds buying all the newspapers and everything. in India also we are seeing similar things. I mean, not in terms of newspapers or large business houses, but there has been a lot of this mouthpieces which propagate kind of hate, or which propagate a lot of anti-national there's few anti-national articles, anti-national quote unquote. But yes, things have been difficult very lately, and I think Debbie herself said something that a journalist was imprisoned, was charged with an article or a tweet rather 5 years back. In India also, the same thing happened. And a person, in fact, I would like to tell the students, this person was himself, he used to run a fact-checking website called All Facts or something like that. I don't exactly remember the name, but he used to run a website where you get to check everything, whatever propaganda, whether it's truth. He used to run a website as well as a Twitter account, and he got pulled up because he was telling us facts. So things are quite difficult. So you need to have, that's why I mentioned, you need to have courage, and you need to have the facts that whatever you're doing, a tweet can land you in trouble, but if you can probably have the right kind of facts in your tweet, I guess that should save you.
There's one question that strikes me. I mean, we'd already talked about it, Chris, that somehow Canada and Western countries are relatively free to speak, to say what they want, more or less. Of course, with the Assange case, that's something else, which we could come to. But Debbie, the Caribbean seems to have a fairly good record as well. How do you account for that compared to, say, other parts of the world, say in Africa? The media doesn't seem to be under that much pressure, or am I wrong?
Oh, it depends. I mean, if we include Haiti, journalists are killed. Cuba, journalists can be beaten up by security thugs. So it is not as free as sometimes we think it is. I think what has worked in the Caribbean is because they're such tiny territories, each one, they actually, by clubbing together, and I was actually there at the start of that in the 80s, and the Caribbean Media Workers Association, Media Associations, the Press Association of Jamaica, and they formed basically a network. It's like your gang, really, and they've got your back. Because I can tell, if you're on a tiny island, everybody knows where everybody is. I remember I was working for Ghana, and we released a report which indicated that the police commissioner was involved in the illegal drugs trade. And the night the report went out, it was released from Barbados to keep me safe in Trinidad, because it was the Trinidadian police commissioner. And I got a call at home saying, "We know where you live," because that's life on a small island. Now, the fact was that Ghana in Barbados had my back. And so the sheer networking across the Caribbean has helped. And that's why I think an organization like the Commonwealth Journalists Association, maybe I'd like to ask the young journalists in the room what they think about more of that networking, so that you know that other people have your back. So if something happens to you, if somebody comes for you, no matter how isolated you might be in your town, your city, your part of the world, what would you want from the CJA to make sure that somebody's got your back? Because I think that's the role that is needed as young journalists, because I know that fear when you're sitting by yourself on a Saturday night and you're not quite sure who's got your back.
So do any of the participants, the young journalists, have a comment to make? Maybe someone who's spoken earlier. I can see Kareem, Khadija, Victoria, if you're still there, Rosette. Could you raise your hand if you want to make a comment, any of you?
I'd like to hear what they want from us, from the CJA.
Exactly.
I think, having so many young journos in the room.
But the trouble is I can't see any other question apart from Victoria. So, Victoria, do you want to say anything? Are you still there?
Yeah, absolutely. No, I think, well, I'm just wrapping my head around the whole networking and CGA thing, but
Yes.
I do kind of just want to know what the CGA does provide as, if you're somewhere, I know obviously I'm in Canada and the UK where, it may not be as dangerous or anything like that. But if you were in a Commonwealth country and you were feeling like, oh, I'm about to, write about this thing and I feel like I may be in danger, how would we reach out, or how would we even find the tools to get help? I'm just not sure, but.
Any advice, Chris?
Well, the tools exist, but I would urge all the young journalists or journalists, period, who are listening to this to join the CJA, and we can facilitate that through the website. So yeah, the tools exist. We have. Again, I go back to this fact that all Commonwealth countries have signed on, all Commonwealth governments have signed on to these protocols that protect freedom of speech, protect journalists, etc. The reality, I can't remember the exact number, but something like 6 or 7 Commonwealth countries are in the bottom of the Committee to Protect Journalists list of the worst countries for protection freedom of speech. Again, this networking thing is so important. We can communicate very quickly now through all manner of social media, and if there is one journalist somewhere in some country and wherever who's in trouble, it's relatively easy to get that word out, and part of the CJA's reason for being is to advocate on the part of journalists.
We've got 8 minutes left, so sorry to interrupt you. So I see Musina Alaran's hands raised, and I'm afraid this will have to be the end question, as it were. So Musina, do you want to speak to the panel?
Okay, yes. Good afternoon. It's afternoon here
Welcome.
in Nigeria. Yes. I'm Musina Alaran, a campus journalist of the University of Ibadan, Nigeria. So, yes, my question is that I would like to know how we can get the public to build their trust back in. The public don't trust the news provided by the journalists again, because there are fake news all around due to the fact that they don't fact check. So it makes the public lose their credibility in journalists. So how do we build that trust back? How do we give them that trust back? So that's what I would like to know.
Thank you. Shalaz, how about you? This lack of trust. I mean, India is a big country, and as we know, is a huge democracy, but there are causes for concern. When you talk about, or when one talks about trust in the media, declining trust, what do you think is happening in India, and what do you think can be done to reverse that, to draw people back?
Yeah, it's a very significant question. And in India, since you have mentioned, like, it's obviously a large country with so many journalists around, but we have experienced it. In today's world, news comes on Twitter first, and then it goes to TV, and then it goes to print the next day, or in between the websites, of course, carry the news. So what I personally do is check the news where you are peddling. There is no alternative to it. We are in a rat race, if I may say so. Rat race in a way that we have this fastest finger first, the one which goes to Twitter and types first to give the news. irrespective of whether it's fake or irrespective of whether there is truth in it. You just go there on Twitter and type as fast as you can so that you are the first one to give that news to people. What I feel is you don't need to do that. You check, you abstain from that. If you don't know whether the source is correct or not, you check again with another source. It has to come up from the horse's mouth, and that's when you trust that source, and that's when you give information to people. And that's how you gain the trust back from people. If you give them information which is correct, the people will come back to your Twitter account or come back to your social media account to check what you're saying. And that's how you give them, the correct information to gain their trust. That's what I feel. Abstain from giving news fast. Abstain from giving, in fact, you give them quality news rather than giving them, news here.
With the news.
Yeah.
I think Chris and Debbie, any final word on this question of trust? Some guidance. You've got a new journalist that's starting. They've got news coming from everywhere. Do you think this is probably a good time for organizations like the BBC or maybe individual journalists who are recognized as authorities and reliable? Do you think this is a time for journalists and organizations to reassert their influence and dominance? Chris first.
Yes, I do. Bizarrely, we tend not to be great communicators of our own worth and our own, of our own worth. We're in the communications business, but don't care for our own image very well, I don't think. But it's so true that it's better to be accurate than it is to be first, and maintaining the trust of the people who read your papers, or watch your TV or radio broadcasts. But yeah, I'd go back to what I said earlier, that choose your sources and choose your sources well, and reject all the stuff that's fed to you to confirm your own prejudice, because it's worthless.
There was a point that was made in the earlier discussion. The idea was, put out that possibly having a kite mark so that the source of the story. That seems to me quite good, but I guess there'll be problems about how to operate it. So, Shilaz, on kite marking, what do you think of that? To trust. Is that possible, feasible?
Yeah, of course. But in a country like India, where there is innumerable journalists, so that kind of kite marking could be in a worse population, could be a bit difficult. But yes, it can be done. It certainly can be done, because that's how things could be streamlined a bit, I feel. Yes.
What do you think, Debbie?
I would finish. I would finish with one basic. My first 5 minutes in a newsroom had been with the age-old saying, "If in doubt, leave out." And while that applied in newsrooms where your editor would send back your material with a red pencil through it, I think it still applies today in the 21st century, where if you are in doubt, don't retweet. If you are in doubt, don't pass it on. Check, fact check. I think all of the basic tenets of journalism still run true today. And trust is something that you earn, and treat it as a really rare resource and a beautiful resource. And just because there are more platforms and more tools and more people can hear you, means that it's even more important that you stick to the truth, you fact checked everything, and you use the many tools that are available to you now to keep your reputation and the trust that people invest in you, that you keep that going.
Thank you very much to all the speakers. And I do hope that, you know, the student journalists who've been listening will have found this session very, very useful, helpful. And I would suggest that you be in touch, look at the Commonwealth Journalists Association website, look at the newsletter that Debbie produces, and obviously get in touch with Chris Cobb about becoming members of Commonwealth Journalists Association, because we are here as a networking association where people from different parts of the Commonwealth can exchange information, raise concerns, and get a sense of solidarity. So thank you very much to everybody.